This week is a build-up to the craziest week that we have of 2024, and it all starts with Mercury stationing retrograde. So let's go ahead and get started talking about it. How's it going, everybody? My name is Cam White, and you are watching the Astrology Report, this time for April 1st through April 7th of 2024. We have a little bit going on this week. However, I look at this as much more of a build-up into next week, and a lot of this week is setting up the context for what next week is going to have. So let's start talking about it. So we start the week off on Monday, on April Fool's Day, with the moon making a sextile to Mars, as well as Saturn and Mercury stationing retrograde. Boy, if there was ever an April Fool's Day to not make a joke that you might think is a little edgy, it's this one. I feel like every year you see a story about an April Fool's joke gone wrong, and I feel like this year you're going to really see like a bad one, because this is not a... Mercury's the trickster and the jokester, and it's just going retrograde where that's just total like, oh, joke goes wrong. But as we start this week, the moon is going to be in Capricorn, and it is going to be sextiling Mars and Saturn. What is that good for? The moon in Capricorn is good for, again, like kind of just detaching emotionally a little bit, like getting your emotions out of things, having to harden up a little bit. And as it makes a sextile to Mars and Saturn, it's just one of those times where it's one of those things where there's a time and a place for everything. You don't have to, completely be overwhelmed with emotions. Even though I know we're in the middle of eclipse season, there's a lot going on for everybody. I know that I've experienced it. I know that a lot of other people I've spoken to have also had a lot of crazy things happening during this eclipse season. But with the moon going into Capricorn early Monday morning, or actually really late Sunday night, I feel like these next couple of days are really good for just being like, all right, what are my priorities? What do I have to do? Let me detach myself emotionally and let me just get some things done so I could let my subconscious work through things. The moon will make a sextile to Mars and Saturn. And Mars and Saturn in Pisces, there's one spectrum of it that is like, okay, both of the malefic planets are in one zodiac sign. So that means whatever Pisces rules in your chart, that's where the problems are. That's where a lot of the burdens are. That's where a lot of the frustrations or fights and conflicts are located. The other way I would look at that is, while both Mars and Saturn are in Pisces, if Mars is like fights and conflicts and Saturn is burdens and discipline and responsibilities, clearly we have a lot that we have to figure out in this area. One way I would look at it is, how, again, are you being more emotionally disciplined? Something I've been talking a lot about is Pisces is like the internal feeling, the internal belief. Like, okay, you might believe X, Y, and Z, but do you actually feel that way? And Mars in Pisces is sort of like taking one step at a time, trusting a little bit more of your intuition, not worrying about, exactly how you get to point A from point A to point B, but more so experiencing the journey itself. With the moon making a sextile to both Mars and Saturn, I think this kind of emotional detachment, this more of a, all right, I just need to get things done, is kind of allowing us some space to navigate that emotion a little bit better, to navigate, all right, like what's right in front of me, what is mine to do, what can I just work on with my hands right at this moment. But on Monday, we have Mercury stationing retrograde. This is when everything starts to go backwards. I've talked to a lot of astrologers about this and other people, and it always just seems like the Mercury shadow phase is more retrograde than the actual retrograde. And it's funny because Mercury being in shadow is like introducing all these issues for you. And the Mercury retrograde is when they, things kind of fall apart and you're forced to address them. And so as Mercury does go retrograde, what is this good for? It's good for rethinking, reviewing, replanning, changing plans. What I like a Mercury retrograde for is to problem solve or to troubleshoot things. Like if you wanted to start something new and you're expecting it to go well the first time, well, this isn't really what that's good for. What this is good for is maybe trying something new and figuring out what the faults are, what the problems are, and how we can improve upon the system. But this isn't Aries. So we are talking about, again, Aries is like the first sign of the zodiac. So it is about spring. It is about initiation. It is about starting things. And the ruler of Aries is Mars, and it's in Pisces, where it's kind of all over the place. And it's in the last zodiac sign, which is about endings. So there's this kind of like, I feel like with Mercury retrograde, there's this vibe of like, what am I doing? Where am I going? Why am I here? What is, again, mine to do and what's like right in front of me? And I like Mercury retrograde in Aries for rethinking what our actions are, rethinking, not only what our strategy is, but how we're going about that. What I love about Pisces is that it's so intuitive. There's a certain part of this that's like, hey, how could we lean more into our intuition? And rather than doing the Virgo stuff where it's like, hey, we have a plan, we have a list, we have to combat that. Why don't we just like really listen to our gut, really listen to ourselves and be like, all right, what do I feel compelled to do at this moment? The other part of this is we are in between eclipses, and the solar eclipse in Aries happens next week. But as we have Mercury going retrograde here, this is setting up more of the context of what the solar eclipse is going to be. Solar eclipses are major endings, they're major beginnings, and this Mercury retrograde is kind of like, okay, what I thought maybe was going to start here actually has a little bit of a twist to it. So as we go throughout the week, we get to Tuesday, and as the moon's in Capricorn, it will make a trine to Jupiter and Uranus. Then it will make a square to Mercury being retrograde, and it'll make a sextile to Neptune. So a couple of lunar transits, and I'm actually kind of looking forward to Tuesday because as the moon's in Capricorn in that Earth sign, we're feeling a little bit more grounded. It's going to make that trine to Jupiter where there is this kind of like wealth in being grounded. Like, all right, like, you know, it reminds me of the, I believe it's the 10 of Cups tarot card where like the fat guy's just kind of sitting there happy and smirking with his full cups. There's something about getting everything done, getting what you have ready to go and feeling wealthy from it. The moon trining Jupiter is some sort of again, it's a trine and it's to the greater benefic. This is some sort of good thing happening here, you know, whether that's like, oh, you know, I took care of X, Y, and Z right at the exact time. I was able to handle, again, X, Y, and Z. And because of that, I got a greater benefit from it than if I did it at any other time. And after the moon makes that trine to Jupiter, where there is that kind of hopefulness, that, you know, abundance feeling that, you know, cool, I'm grateful, I got that done, I'm feeling good. The moon makes a trine to Uranus, where this is kind of like, have you ever done one thing that you were resisting doing and you didn't, you felt good, and you felt so good that you did another thing that you were putting off and that made you feel even better? That's what Tuesday kind of reminds me of. There's this opportunity to, again, get a lot more for a lot less, and then having that kind of spark an urge to do even more or to have, again, some sort of other breakthrough. What I love about Uranus is that, yes, it is instability, but when you get something like a trine from it, it's like a happy accident. You know, all of a sudden you do X, Y, and Z, you're at the right place, you're at the right time, and you are the person who is receiving some sort of benefit, receiving some sort of like random thing that ends up working out for you. But then after that, the moon is going to make a square to Mercury retrograde. And I think the difficult part about that is while the moon is in Capricorn and there is this kind of, again, might be a more emotional attachment, Capricorn is about like systems and regulations. And so we might have this like emotional connection to be like, all right, well, I kind of just want to follow the plan or follow the structure that I have, you know, implemented. But if Mercury retrograde, or I should say, if Mercury's about logistics and how we're doing that kind of stuff and it's squaring the moon, you might have to call an audible. I've been really thinking about this Mars in Pisces and Mercury retrograde in Aries as like calling an audible. If you're not familiar with what that is, think of like football. In football, they have a lot of different plays that they can run, but then sometimes the coach says, fuck it, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're just like, we're just going to go with that. Maybe it's a Hail Mary. And I think what's good about Tuesday is the moon in Capricorn squaring Mercury retrograde might be this like, no, we have to follow the drills that we have laid out and we have to follow the plans that we have. But maybe you just have to call an audible and be like, you know what? Like that would have worked for this time that would have worked for a previous time. But right now we need to do something a little bit different. So there is going to be this resistance to wanting to change things or wanting to call an audible. But I feel like at the end of the day, that is what's needed. After the moon makes that square to Mercury, it does make a sextile to Neptune, where I do believe once you kind of overcome that resistance to making a sudden change or to, again, changing plans or changing the way that your actions are, the moon sextiling Neptune offers a lot of creativity to, you know, lean into that a little bit more of like, okay, if I got to make this change and I got to call an audible, like how creative can I get with it? You know, what is the most idealistic rose-colored glass way that, you know, no one else can think of? So then we get to Wednesday, and Wednesday's quite a vibe shift because we're going to be having the moon ingress into Aquarius and conjoin Pluto. And we also are going to have Venus conjoining Neptune. So it's a really stark black and white day with how the vibe is going. Because as the moon's in Aquarius, yeah, we're going to have a little bit more of an emotional connection, or at least some short-term attention is being brought to whatever Aquarius rules in our chart, as well as, you know, the people that are around us, society and structures and ideas. But it's going to be conjoining Pluto, where, again, there might be this underlying fear. There might be this underlying, like, you know, power struggle at play where, again, maybe you feel very empowered by the people that are around you, or there's a lot of like fear around, again, like society and these ideas and things like that. But as the moon, you know, conjoins Pluto, I feel Pluto's been so interesting in my client work, because what's fun about being an astrologer when you're doing clients is you see how all of these transits are affecting everyone really differently, but all through the correct archetype of whatever that planet is, you know, suggesting. And so I look at the moon conjoining Pluto as this does allow for an opportunity for a breakthrough of like, okay, if Pluto makes the small things big and the big things small, there might be something that is typically a bigger issue that you just kind of start to minimize. But also the moon conjoining Pluto might make this really small thing and really bring it into your face, and it might feel really overwhelming. And so there's kind of like this trade-off with the moon conjoining Pluto where there might be this issue that felt larger than life that you're able to minimize, and there might be another issue that really isn't all that significant but is feeling really large. But when you add that on top of Venus conjoining Neptune is it's really good for specific things. I've gotten comments that like, you got to stop with the drug analogies, but like Venus conjoining Neptune, like I'm going to do my best here, but imagine a scenario where you are euphoric, where you are dreaming of anything and you feel as if like, remember being young and a kid and just having this wild imagination that anything is possible and that it just made you feel good. It made you excited. And, as we get older, for whatever reason, we turn that part of our brain off, which is such a shame because something I love doing as an adult is like tapping more into that. Like, why am I not connected to that inner child that can imagine anything great and, can feel like that's possible and bring that emotion to me and feel that excitement? I feel like that's what Venus conjoining Neptune is good for. What it's not good for is thinking in realistic terms. And what I mean by that is Venus conjoining Neptune is being way too rose-colored glasses. It's like, again, when you meet someone and it feels too good to be true and the emotions are really high and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. But then as time goes on, you realize, that is also a human being and you are a human being and they have imperfections and maybe they lied or maybe you misunderstood something. Venus conjoining Neptune is good for leaning into the very powerful feel-good emotions, albeit maybe not in a realistic circumstance. That's why I brought up this childhood imagination thing. Like, hey, that may not be the most realistic thing, but the feeling is what is important because human beings, we're capable of anything. You're capable of really putting anything that you could put your mind to. It's just about, okay, what can you put your mind to? How creative can you be? How big is your vision? But the hard part here is when you think that exact thing or that experience that you're in is what is reality. And I think with Venus conjoining Neptune as one of our highlights for the week, I would be careful about having such high expectations that you get disappointed. Expectations are premeditated judgments. And I feel like with Venus conjoining Neptune, Neptune is about deception. There is a level of deception here at play, like kind of getting swindled or, Venus conjoining Neptune reminds me of almost like a 1940s character of a woman and a man. A woman just gets completely swooned by this charming, handsome man. And he's like all this and this and that. And then as you come to find out, there's a lot more problems with him than you were anticipating, but you were so swept up in the emotion of how exciting and fun and, how creative everything was that you didn't really see things for what they were. And that's kind of the hard part about Wednesday is that there's this one part of it that's very mundane and cold, which is the moon in Aquarius. And there's this other part that's really good for dreaming big, really good for being creative, but not good for, having these realistic expectations. It's better to just kind of dream big, let yourself feel that, and then kind of come back to the drawing board rather than being exactly how I'm seeing it right now and how great everything is exactly the way that it's going to go. And it can't go any other way. We have to kind of, again, tamper our expectations here. But I think at the end of the day, you should enjoy Venus conjoining Neptune in any way possible. Maybe go see a really good movie. And then once we get to Thursday, the moon is going to make a square to Jupiter, and it will square Uranus as well, and then sextile Mercury. And then we have two more highlights on Thursday evening. One is the sun will be conjoining the North Node, and Venus is going to be ingressing into Aries. So we do have quite a bit of a fiery shift going into Thursday. But let's talk about the moon real quick. Well, the moon is in Aquarius squaring Jupiter and Taurus. I can't stop thinking about you're with a group of people and no one can decide on what they want to eat or what restaurant they want to go to. But there's something about the moon in Aquarius squaring Jupiter and Taurus where it's what's going to work for everybody? You know what I mean? Jupiter and Taurus, for example, I'm a huge meat eater. I've talked about carnivore and all that shit before. But I also have vegan friends. Clearly, we're not going to go to a steakhouse, together, right? We have to find some sort of middle ground. And that's what I look at with the moon, in Aquarius squaring Jupiter is okay, there's this enrichment that wants to happen. That's Jupiter and Taurus. But with the moon in Aquarius, it's like, what is going to work for everybody? And, with Pluto there, we're re-navigating what Aquarius means for us in our lives, right? And so I just look at the moon squaring Jupiter as like, okay, maybe we need to, again, tamper our expectations a little bit, be able to work with people so everyone's a winner, creating a win-win situation here. But then as the moon squares Uranus, it's like one of those things like, let's say, I have a bunch of carnivore friends and a bunch of vegan friends, and we all decide to go get dinner, and we agree on a restaurant. That moon in Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus is like, oh, it says it's a vegan restaurant, but they cook all of their food on the same grill as like the meat. And some vegans get like really weird about that. And so they can't eat there, or they're all out of the vegan stuff, or they're all out of the, the meat or something like that. There's some sort of disruption that still ends up happening either way. And I think that might be frustrating. Again, you can't make everyone happy. It's one of those things too, when you go, I was just at a big dinner not that long ago, like a bunch of people were there. And a lot of us were having fun, but there was a few people there that were like, what is your problem? Like, they're like, just kind of, when you have a big group of people, everyone's so different and they can have different ways of interacting with people. And then when you put everyone together in a room, we're navigating relationships in this completely different way. Like one-on-one relationships are so much different than like group dynamics. And so I look at that moon in Aquarius squaring Uranus, like the group dynamic kind of has this little bit of like a disturbance, kind of like this, again, unexpected event that happens. But as the moon separates from Uranus, it starts to sextile Mercury. There's a way to get out of that. Like, rather than, resisting something and being like, oh, this is really annoying, or they're really frustrating, like the moon sextiling Mercury retrograde in Aries is like, have a creative way of going about that. Maybe change the subject. Maybe think about how you can interact with that person or the situation in a different way. Like, that's what's so fun about Mercury retrogrades is like, oftentimes you are going to be put in a situation where either you are forced to, or the wires in your brain get connected where you see things in a way that you hadn't seen them before in like an easier way. And I think that's what the moon, after it squares Uranus, sextiling Mercury does, is like, oh, well, here's a solution. And why didn't I ever think of that solution before? And then we get to the two highlights on Thursday, which is the sun conjoining the North Node and Venus ingressing into Aries. Gosh, the sun conjoining the North Node. You want to talk about like a ego trip. And, I really kind of have a bad taste in my mouth about the spiritual community as like a whole, and it's a very broad umbrella, so I'm not really attacking anyone specifically or even you, but this idea of like, you have to let go of the ego and your ego's running you. It's like, yes, that's a very important thing to navigate, but it's like, it's also really important too. Like, you are a human being. That is a part of the human experience. And I look at the sun conjoining the North Node as like, we could sit here all day and be like, you're a bad person and you should have guilt over the things that you've done. And, you need to surrender and, be this passive person. But sometimes, like, I'm the type of person that I like gassing people up. Like, the sun conjoining the North Node is like, if you don't think you're the absolute hottest shit on the block, you're kind of doing it wrong. And that doesn't mean coming about it in an egotistic way where you like legitimately think you're better than everybody, but more so of like installing that confidence of like, I have this unwavering confidence that I know I can achieve anything I want to. And I know I'm, the greatest person that I can be. It's not that I'm greater than you or I'm better than you. It's that I am the best person that I can be. And I know that, and I have that confidence fueled up in me. It's like a raging fire. And so when I see the sun conjoining the North Node, is like, gas yourself up. Gas yourself up. Like, feel that confidence. Feel that, almost to an arrogant level. That doesn't mean harm people. That doesn't mean walk all over people and shit on other people. I mean, sometimes you got to shit on them. But I'm just saying, like, you need to be gassed up. There's going to be this feeling of like, I can do anything I put my mind to. And I want you to feel that, because I feel so many people don't have that feeling right now. We're so in this, victim complex of like, sure, society's crumbling and everything's expensive and everything's out of your control. And that feeling of fear just can overwhelm you, and it doesn't serve you. It can make you right, but it doesn't serve you in any way. It only serves you by making things right, which again could be also your ego of like, oh, your ego could tell you like, I'm not good enough in X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to put together the pieces of my reality to affirm that and make sure I'm right, but it doesn't serve you. Like, would you rather be happy? Like in the sun in Aries, it's exalted here. Like, we're in spring, we're waking up, it gets dark at 7 p.m. now, which is like, for me, it changes my whole reality, because I just feel amazing when it doesn't get dark till 7 p.m. But the sun conjoining the North Node is like, feel something, feel alive. And we get more of that with Venus ingressing into Aries. Venus going into Aries, I say the word detriment because that is the correct terminology about Venus's placement in Aries, but people really hold on to that word as if that's all bad. It's like, no, not really. Venus is, rules Taurus or, Libra, which is, very orthodox Venus things like, good food, good vibes, relationships, elegance, luxury. But Venus in Aries, it's like, well, Venus is still going to do Venus stuff. Like Venus in Aries reminds me of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Like Mrs. Smith, she's like just kind of like, I fucking love Angelina Jolie. She's just like this fucking hot babe that is like some secret agent that like Venus and she also has Venus in Aries too, I believe. She's got a ton of Aries placements, but combative and in your face, and it's like sexy, and there's kind of like this tension in the relationship. Or I shouldn't say there's like this tension; they try to fucking kill each other. But that's like that Venus and Aries vibe where it's like there's this pleasure, there's this fun in being combative and starting things, and it's like it reminds me of Venus and Aries is like it's fun to be bad, and I don't mean like doing like legitimately bad things, but like for example. It reminds me of, when you get like it almost reminds me of like when you see videos of, not Mormons, Amish people, like, like I saw a video of an Amish person on one of those, motorcycle games in like an arcade. And just, there's something about that to me that's so funny. But Venus in Aries is like, let me do something a little bad. Like, if you're someone, it reminds me of being a kid. And I remember when I was like in 5th grade and we were all saying crap and heck. And then I heard one of my friends say shit. And I was like, oh, you just said the S word. And then some other kid would say shit. And then we did it and we all giggled because we're all like, 8-year-old boys. But that's like what Venus in Aries reminds me of. Like, it's okay to have a little fun and be bad. And I think with the sun conjoining the North Node in Aries is like, maybe we need that little tickle. Maybe we need, that's a weird word to use, but that's just what came up in my head. But we need that kind of like spark of like, I want to have fun, but maybe it needs to be something a little bit more edgy. It needs to be something a little bit more like, gets the adrenaline rushing a little bit. And then as we head into Friday, the moon is going to go into Pisces and then pretty much be applying to Mars all day. And it will make a conjunction to Mars by the end of the evening. We're getting into that dark moon phase before this eclipse. We just had the sun conjoining the North Node in Aries. We had the Mercury retrograde in Aries. Venus is now in Aries. So this is all lit up. We're starting to get a lot of context about what the solar eclipse is going to be. But when the moon enters Pisces, we're starting to get to that dark moon phase before that eclipse. And as the moon gets into Pisces, it reminds me of like locker room before the big game, or the green room, or that second before you go on stage. It's like there's this, if you've ever performed or even played a sport, like, or anything. Maybe it was just a big interview that you had for a big job that you wanted. There's this nervousness before, like, again, like, before you go on stage, it's like you want to just throw up. Like there's something, everything in your body resists it. And I look at the moon in Pisces conjoining Mars in Pisces as like, it's those moments, like not right before you step out, but right as you step into that pre-experience space. So whether that's the green room, whether that's, you just got ready for an interview and you're, sitting in your car waiting, or again, before the big game, you're in the locker room. There's this like, all right, like, how am I feeling right now? I'm feeling everywhere. I'm feeling nervous. I'm over here. I'm over there. And it's okay. You just have to work through that experience. Like, there's still a lot of artists that are really big that still get nervous before they go out on stage. It's a lot. Especially when you get people that have like 20, 30,000 people sold out venues. And it's like, the energy is so high. And so I look at the moon conjoining Mars and Pisces as like this like real nervousness feeling of like, oh, what's going on? And, how do I navigate this? And, some people use liquor or drugs to combat that. And other people, pray. Other people, just tune out and listen to music or whatever that is. But that's the vibe on Friday, is like, this weird nervousness before in a big event, and it's coming and it's about to happen. And then we get to Saturday, and then on Saturday, the moon will conjoin Saturn kind of first thing in the morning, and then it will sextile Jupiter and Uranus. Also, Venus will make a sextile to Pluto. Saturday is an interesting vibe because I think as the moon conjoins Saturn and Pisces, it's like, okay, you sat in the nervous feelings a little bit on Friday, and it's time to like, again, I think of this as like a performing artist. It's like you're in the green room, you're getting nervous, and then the what would you call them? Like a venue worker comes in and is like, all right, like, or your audio engineer is like, all right, cool, here's your mic, here's your setup, here's your set list. Do you need any water? And you're kind of like, you got to put your game face on a little bit, and you're like, all right, I'm still nervous, but I got to be here and present right now. That's what the moon conjoining Saturn feels like. And then the moon sextiles Jupiter and Uranus, where it's like, cool, the set list is right. All of the audio is working. All of the lights and pyrotechnics are working. Everything is ready to go. Like, there's not like, oh, all of a sudden this happened, and now you get to freak out and spiral. Like, let's say you're about to do a big interview, and you look at your resume and you misspelled a bunch of things. It's like, and then you can just spiral and freak out about it. It's like, that's not what the vibe is here. It's like, kind of sober up a little bit, get into reality. And it's like, cool, I did this, cool, I did that, sweet, everything's kind of working. And then we get another highlight, which is Venus sextiling Pluto. I like Venus sextiling Pluto in this regard, and I'm kind of interested how this ends up looking. I think we got one last year, but Venus in Aries sextiling Pluto in Aquarius just reminds me of like it reminds me of like, maybe I'm biased because Venus rules my 11th house of friends, but it reminds me of, or like Venus in Aries sextiling Pluto in Aquarius is like, Venus rules my 11th house of friends, and Aries is my 5th house of like drugs. And I remember like the first time I like smoked weed with my friends, and it was like, and when you're like 14, 15, you smoke weed with your friends, there's kind of like this like empowerment feeling of like, yeah, we're, cool and we're bad. And it's, like there's just kind of like an edginess to it. And that's what Venus sextiling Pluto reminds me of. It's like, there might be this connection to people around you that is kind of empowering by doing something a little bit bad. And I'm not, again, suggesting you commit crimes or like, again, do something like ethically or morally bad. I mean, that's kind of your prerogative and for you to navigate in your own life. But I look at it as like, there's some sort of like, this is fun and I'm going to do this. And I have people around me, or I have a certain circumstance in which this feels more empowering to do. And then we get to Sunday, and Sunday is the moon conjoining Neptune. And then the moon goes into Aries and conjoins Venus. It's that moment. It's that moment before you go out on stage. It's that, all right, like we've been in the green room, we've been in the locker room, we've been in the, now we're in the office waiting for, the manager to come in to interview you, and you have all these nerves, and the moon conjoining Neptune is like, well, what if this and what if that? And, but then there's also this level of inspiration of like, man, this is going to be sick. Man, I'm going to crush this. Like, what are all the things that can happen? And like, you kind of just go everywhere, but it's not a bad everywhere. It's not a bad spiral. It's a like feeling completely encapsulated by the moment. And I think that's such a beautiful feeling. I love being so forced to be in the moment where it's overwhelming. So the moon conjoins Neptune, and that's the vibe. And then the moon ingresses into Aries and conjoins Venus. And it's like, again, if you've ever watched, a big artist before they go out on stage, or football games before they go out for their like, like it reminds me of like high school where they have like the banners that they like rip through. It's like before they do that, they pump everyone up. They have like a big chant. They have like a big scream, and they're like, that's what Sunday is like this kind of like, all right, we're all over the place, but then the moon goes into Aries, and it's like, it's time to get hype. It's time to get pumped. This is what's going on. This is what's in your face. And that brings us to next week. We have the solar eclipse in Aries, which is that significant shift. We have the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Yeah, that sucks, but it's also a great time to take something really serious. Like if it's the big game day, like Mars conjoining Saturn is like, okay, well, are you not going to play at your absolute best? Are you not going to take everything absolute seriously? And we have the Mercury Cazimi. The issues or what we're rethinking or what we're kind of going over. It reminds me, again, continuing that analogy, since I'm on this track, of like a big show. Let's say Mercury stationing retro, like Mercury in shadow is like, you're getting ready for this. Like, let's say you're a performing artist. You're getting ready for this really big show. It's your biggest show that you've ever done. Mercury in shadow, Mercury, going retrograde is like, okay, like I got all these pieces together. Mercury goes retrograde. Then it's like, all right, maybe there was some adjustments here and there, but now it's just a matter of, is this show and this performance going to work the way that I want to? And we're going to find out. And that Mercury Cazimi is like, okay, what worked in that show and what didn't work in that show? Like, as if you're a big artist, that might not be your last huge show, but if this is your first one, you're kind of learning a lot about it. And that's what is good for this Mercury retrograde. So next week is really the huge vibe shift, and it gets really, really, really serious. And I don't say this, I made a TikTok about this that got a lot of views. This isn't something to be afraid of. Like, yes, bad things will happen, but bad things happen no matter what. And it's one of those things where what is important though is that this is serious. Like it could be a serious good thing. It's like a wedding. Like, getting married is a serious thing, but it's not bad. Does that make sense? I mean, unless of course you married the wrong person. But even then. So I want you to look at this week as prep for game day. Next week is the big game. I love and appreciate you guys. I'll see you next week.